In the heart of London, along the crowded streets of St. Giles, there stood a grand building known as Mewk's Brewery. It was enormous, with giant wooden vats and barrels that seemed to touch the ceiling. The smell of malt and hops filled the air, a warm, sweet scent that reminded anyone who entered of the joy beer could bring to people's lives. Among the men who worked there was Thomas Blake, a young cooper who had recently moved from the countryside. Thomas had come to the city seeking work and adventure, but nothing could have prepared him for the strange events that were about to unfold. Thomas had grown up around barrels and casks, helping his father in a small village brewery. He knew the smell of fresh malt, the sound of liquid pouring into a wooden vat, and the careful skill it took to secure the iron bands around the barrels. But Mews's was different. Here, the vats were enormous, some holding over 100,000 gallons of beer. Every day, Thomas carefully inspected them, checking for leaks or signs of weakness. He knew how dangerous a failing vat could be. The wooden walls held thousands of gallons of beer under enormous pressure, and the collapse could be deadly. It was a quiet morning in October 1814 when Thomas arrived at work. Outside, London was gray and cold. Thick clouds hung low in the sky, and the streets were crowded with people rushing to markets, shops, and offices. Inside the brewery, the air was warmer, and the sounds of clinking wood, splashing liquid, and distant shouting of workers echoed through the massive halls. Thomas walked past the towering vats, greeting his fellow workers with a nod. He approached one of the largest casks, the 22-foot-tall vat number 5, and examined it closely. There were no visible cracks, but he noticed a faint, almost musical creaking sound. The wood groaned under the pressure of the beer inside. "Creaking?" he muttered to himself, leaning closer. He tapped the vat lightly with a mallet. The hollow sound worried him. Something wasn't right. "Thomas," called the foreman, Mr. Harrison, "are you ready to start the barrel inspections?" "Yes, sir," Thomas replied. "I'll begin with the large vats today." He moved carefully from one vat to another, checking the iron bands and wooden supports, making notes of anything unusual. But as he returned to vat number 5, the creaking had grown louder, sharper. Thomas stepped back, his stomach tightening. Suddenly, there was a loud crack. One of the iron bands around the vat snapped, flying off and hitting the floor with a resounding clang. Before Thomas could react, the wooden walls of the vat split open. A monstrous wave of beer surged out, roaring across the floor like a small river. Thomas stumbled and fell, his heart hammering in his chest. The flood of beer swept past him, carrying barrels, tools, and anything else that was not tied down. The noise was deafening. "Run! Everyone, run!" someone screamed. Thomas grabbed a nearby beam to steady himself, holding on as the liquid washed past. He could hear the shouts and cries of his fellow workers, some trapped under fallen barrels or thrown by the force of the flood. More vats began to collapse, one after another, sending massive amounts of beer crashing into the already chaotic room. The brewery shook violently, and Thomas realized that this was not just an accident. It was a disaster. Outside, the streets of St. Giles were quickly transformed. The beer flooded the narrow alleys, slipping into homes and shops. People ran screaming from their houses, some slipping in the sticky liquid. Horses pulling carts struggled to move, their hooves sinking into the thick, foamy mess. The air was filled with the sweet, heavy smell of beer mixed with dust and smoke from nearby chimneys. London had become a strange, sticky river city. Thomas, still clinging to the beam, looked for a safe way out. He saw a ladder leading to the roof and scrambled toward it, dodging rolling barrels and floating crates. From above, he could see the full scale of the disaster. The beer had formed rivers through the streets, carrying furniture, barrels, and even small carts along with it. The city looked like a flooded town, yet the liquid was golden brown and bubbling. From the roof, Thomas noticed a small alley where several people were trapped. They were surrounded by beer, frightened and unsure where to go. Thomas knew he had to help. Carefully, he climbed down to their level, using floating debris as stepping stones. "Hold on," he shouted. "I'll get you out." One by one, Thomas helped the group to a slightly higher street. They held hands tightly as he guided them over fallen beams and slippery planks. The people were grateful, some crying, some laughing nervously at the absurdity of the situation. In the middle of the chaos, a sense of camaraderie formed. Strangers helped each other, supporting those who stumbled or screamed in fear. Meanwhile, the city authorities had been alerted. Firefighters, soldiers, and local volunteers arrived with ropes and carts, assisting people trapped in the flood. But the beer kept pouring from the broken vats, relentless and uncontrollable. Thomas continued to assist anyone he could reach, moving through the chaos with determination. He remembered his experience with barrels, the strength of wood under pressure, and carefully navigated the dangerous streets. By the end of the day, the flood had destroyed several buildings, and a few lives were tragically lost. Yet thanks to brave individuals like Thomas, many had been saved. The disaster became known as the Great London Beer Flood of 1814, a tale that would be told for generations. It was remembered not only for the tragedy, but also for the surreal and almost humorous nature of the flood. A river of beer sweeping through a busy London neighborhood. In the following weeks, Thomas was celebrated as a hero. Families he had saved sent letters of thanks, and neighbors told stories of his bravery. Yet Thomas remained humble. He insisted that he had done only what anyone else would have done in his place. Still, he could not forget the fear he had felt or the incredible power of the flood. Life slowly returned to normal in St. Giles. The streets were cleaned, the buildings rebuilt, and Mook's brewery was eventually restored. Thomas returned to his work as a cooper, inspecting barrels and vats with the same care as before. But he always paid extra attention to the largest vats, remembering the day when one small crack had almost caused total destruction. Years later, Thomas would walk past the rebuilt brewery and recall that terrifying day. He remembered the roar of the beer, the creaking wood, and the panic of people trying to escape. More than that, he remembered the courage of ordinary people in the face of danger. Neighbors helped neighbors. Strangers offered hands and guidance. And even in the strangest disaster imaginable, humanity had prevailed. Thomas smiled quietly, watching children play in the streets, their laughter echoing through the alleys once again. The Great London Beer Flood had left scars, both in the buildings and in memory. But it had also shown the power of courage, quick thinking, and kindness. And Thomas Blake knew this. Sometimes the most remarkable stories are not about the floods, fires, or accidents themselves, but about the people who rise to meet them. In the heart of London, the story of a young cooper and a river of beer would be remembered forever. A strange but inspiring tale of bravery and humanity. The end.